Hi friends, welcome back. Today we're going to talk through the how-tos of writing up our project to our reporting information project. So as we talked about in a previous video and we've talked about in class during our live streams and other activities, what we're working on is an information report. An information report is a way to find the best information that is out there, whether it be best practices or options or alternatives to solving a particular problem or addressing a particular situation, sifting through all the information out there, and then combining that all together and reporting it in a way that is clear, concise, accurate, and brings all that information together so that the reader can make their decision based on the best information available. So, as we're putting together this paper, we need to build our framework, we need to build our house in order to have a structure to keep our information organized. So, as with all of our documents in our English part, we already know we're using MLA format. We know what that looks like. We can already build those pieces in there. So, obviously we have our little title on our page number, and we know our very first thing is going to be our intro. We're going to build our intro, our body, and at some point we'll finish with our conclusion. Now, if it were only as easy as my little picture, I know, we're going to get there. So let's talk about our introduction. So in our introduction, we need to tell what it is that the reader is reading. What is this? And we know already it's an information report. Not only is it an info report, it's an information report where you've gathered the information, synthesized it, and developed this document to inform the reader the best practices out there. And your task here, you're giving information that you've synthesized, or your synthesis of this, letting the reader know the best information available. So in our introduction, after we've kind of covered these pieces, you need to tell us a little bit about the scenario. What is the situation that you're working through? And as we do this, we obviously are also going to share parts of the rhetorical situation. Our audience that we are writing this for is not me. It is the person that was identified as your audience in your scenario. So as you're writing this, keep in mind, you're not writing it for your professor, you're writing it for your boss, your coworker, your professor, whomever that is. So make sure you're keeping your introduction and your framework using that audience in mind. For our scenario, we're still going to talk the background of it, because that explains the why of what we're doing. It also is going to help us understand, as you, the author, what your motivations are and the audience and your desired outcomes from this project. Now, if we're flipping back to our rhetorical situation, a lot of this right here, we're falling into the context. So when I tell you an introduction should explain the topic, the context, and the purpose, which is the only thing we really haven't talked about, but it kind of falls right into here. You understand that when I'm talking about those pieces of rhetorical situation, that's how that all comes together and falls together. And as we talked about before, the last pieces of our medium and design, which is the MLA format, the 1,200 words, 4.5 to 6 pages, quote requirements, all of that stuff. And that's how we use the rhetorical situation in this. But as we're talking about actually writing our paper, what's important here is that our introduction manages to cover these different aspects in here. So as we're talking through our process, let's just back up a couple steps right here. Let's see if my orange marker will hold out for me. So obviously, what we've probably already worked through, we're going to have to choose our scenario. You have 7 options to choose from. You pick one. They cover a full gamut of different topics, research areas, science, math, engineering, writing, research, workplace, best practices. You've got all sorts of different options to choose from. 7 options, choose one. After we've chosen that, we need to make sure we're identifying a rhetorical situation, those pieces that I just talked over there. After we've chosen our scenario and identified a rhetorical situation, which we've sketched out here, we need to figure out what kind of sources and what sources we need, or what information it is that we need. Are we looking for legal kinds of documents in terms of what a business can or can't ask us to do, or how to do it if we're looking at smoking and vaping in a workplace scenario? Are we looking at best practices in terms of a nonprofit or a business model? Are we looking at other designs of engineering projects and how we can use their aspects of their engineering and design in order to design our own project, learning from their experiences and their designs to develop our own? So all of those are going to need different kinds of information and sources. And so knowing what kind of needs we have is going to help us figure out where to go and look for those sources of information. The good news is our library can help us with identifying both our source needs and what resources we have access to. But we need to think about also the requirements in terms of this paper as an academic exercise. We know we need 5 sources. We need 3 different kinds. And we know that our library has access to lots of different kinds and different sources out there. So looking and figuring out what we have access to and what we need to come up with the best information we have access to at the current time. So after we've identified what it is that we need, we've got to find our information. And you notice I've underlined the word print here. It is very, very helpful in a research situation to physically have a copy of your resources in front of you. It helps with annotating, it helps with taking notes, it helps with highlighting as we're sifting through our information to make sure that we're getting the best information out there. And chances are we're going to start off with more than 5 sources. But as we read them and go through the information, we discover what is actually useful and what may not be as useful as when we were just kind of doing our perusing and our scan of it to say, hey, I might be able to use this, hit print. Now, with that said, library here on campus allows you free printing, access to all of the different databases and sources that we have. And in week 5, I'm hopeful, maybe week 6, we should be meeting with the library to go over how to access their information both from home and here at physical space on campus. So after we've found our sources, found our information, gone through our different searches, we need to actually start sifting through all of this information that we found. So we're going to read them. We're going to annotate, take some notes. Summarize. Basically, we're identifying what is the useful information in here and kind of ignoring the rest of it, but figuring out, sifting through, getting the good stuff, and making notes about that. And having it printed off here, we can write in the margins, we can highlight it, we can scribble it alongside to talk about what we agree with or what we don't agree with, as well as, hey, this is how this information is actually useful for us. So, just going to draw my not great little picture here. When I do this, I do lots of underlining. I highlight. When the paragraph is here, I get over in this margin here and have a whole little conversation with myself in the margin of what I like and what I don't like. And one of the things I often do is highlight the quotes that I'm like, oh, this is a great quote here. I know I'm going to use this, and make those notes. So now that we have chosen our scenario, identified our situation, talked about our source needs, found our sources, and gotten through all of that information, we have an idea of the framework that we're working with for our paper. So our 6th step in this whole process is going to be building our framework. You can't build a house if you start with the windows. You need to actually build the foundation and put in the framework first. So let's talk about building that framework. This is for all of you that stare at a blank screen and don't know what to do. So we already know the MLA formatting basics. You have your name, date, class, topic, your heading or your title in the middle, which would be the title of your scenario. Up in the upper right-hand corner, you're going to put in your last name and your page number. We already know those MLA basics, so we can build that framework. So then our very first piece is our introduction. We've already talked about that over here. And in our introduction, all of these pieces that we talked about right here is what we're going to plug into our introduction. Our next step or piece, after we do our introduction, we're going to pick out our headings. Our headings are just the main ideas or the topics or the topic paragraph or what this paragraph below is going to be about. And we know what those paragraphs are going to be because it's based on the subjects and research areas that we found over here. Now, keep in mind, you are not organizing by source. You're organizing by topic of your information. And this is actually going to help you so you don't just summarize an article and string 5 summaries of articles together. So we are getting headings and we're organizing those headings by topic. So if you were working through the scenario where it was talking about best practices in animal adoption, we probably are going to look at best practices in not only adoptions and adoption screenings and helping animals get matches, but we're probably also going to talk about things of best practices in nonprofits. We're going to talk about best practices in animal rescue. We're going to talk about creating successful matches. All of those are going to be different kinds of headings that we're going to talk about. Now, all those headings were topical. They weren't by article that was out there. Think of these headings as your labels. And underneath each of those labels for the subject or topic paragraph, that is what you're going to talk about in that next paragraph. So chances are, based on the sizing and what we're looking at this, we're probably going to have roughly 6 to 8 paragraph headings. And in knowing what we're going to talk about in each of these headings, we can actually design our topic sentence or our main idea sentence for each of these paragraphs. Write our first sentence. MI is shorthand for main idea. In essence, you're telling us what this next paragraph is going to be about. We know what this next paragraph is because we put our little placeholder, our little heading on that. And now we need to make sure as we're writing our paper that all of our information in that paragraph relates back to that heading, relates back to that first sentence, and that we're not just rambling off into some direction. So we've got our intro, we've got our headings by topic. We're going to use our annotated bibliography, which I'm going to talk about in another video, to use to supplement and plug into our information. But after we'll get to that in a different video. But for this part right now, we've got our 6 to 8 headings. We've got our first sentence, which is our main idea sentence, put in here. Next, we're going to go over to our annotated bibliography that we put together as our document, where we were annotating, taking notes, summarizing all of this information right here. And we do this fancy little thing that I like to call cut and paste. But if you happen to find a really good quote or summary or paraphrase, let's start adding those in to our piece right here. It does not have to be organized because obviously this is part of our drafting process. But now under each of these headings, we're going to drop in, yeah, that's what we'll do, drop in our article info / sources / quotes / paraphrase. Now, as I'll tell you in another video when we talk about annotated bibliographies, this is where we make sure that our quotes and paraphrases that we wrote over here in our annotated bib already have their citations plugged into them, so that when you're cut and pasting, you're not forgetting or misattributing that information. But you already wrote that in your summary here, so you just go copy, drop, paste into here, and we have that there. So after we have our main idea sentence for each paragraph, we've put in some of our quotes, our sources, our paraphrases. We need to actually put in more of our structure in pieces to kind of flesh this out a little bit. So as we're building our house, we're now starting to put in our walls and our windows and our other pieces. So we have our first sentence. Now we're going to go down here and we're going to start plugging in this information. So keep building my framework here. We need to not just have a main idea and then a bunch of quotes and random paraphrases. We actually need to put our other stuff in there too. So this is where we're going to have our examples. We're going to have supporting details. we're going to need to explain how or why we can use this information that we quoted or paraphrased. And we're going to need to try to connect this all together to explain what the relationship is with our sourced material and the topic that we're trying to cover here. And once we have this, and obviously 2 and 2.5, this is all going to be kind of scrambled in, mixed in together. Put all this together and then get your concluding paragraph sentence. And this is not necessarily reiterating what you already just said. It is more saying, now what? How do I use this information? How is this relevant? I'm just going to say R-E-L-E because you know what I'm going for. So that was all kind of step 6. As you can see, I'm running out of board, which is good because we're only really left with 2 things, our leftovers and our conclusion. Now you're like, what are leftovers? And I'm not talking about the kind that we're trying to figure out what was in the Cool Whip container in the fridge. I'm talking about our leftovers usually over here in our readings and our annotation and our notes. Almost always you're going to have things that are left over in your research. You've come across information, but ultimately when you built your framework, you figured out that it really doesn't fit anywhere. And this is at the point that we need to decide, do we create another paragraph to include this information, or is it not actually as relevant as we thought it was, and do we just discard it and forget about it? That is a judgment call based on your research topic, whether or not it is going to be useful information for the reader to know back over here in your purpose in the context of your situation. I can't tell you what that research is. I can't tell you what it is that you found, but that's a judgment call that you need to make. Do not make that decision based on the length of your paper. Nobody wants to read filler. Nobody wants to read that stuff that you're just filling pages to fill up to make it to a particular requirement of 1,200 words or what have you. Don't do that. Quality over quantity always. But you need to decide, leftovers here, does it fit into this framework? Does it fit into here? Or do we toss it? Then lastly, we have our conclusion. Our conclusion, we have a terrible system where we've often told our writers that a conclusion is just a reiteration of your introduction. And it should be so much more than that. It should be actually taking the information and telling us how to apply, how to use, what to get out of this entire thing, and being that charge to say, okay, this is what's next. This is how we use it. This is how we apply it. This is what we're going to do going forward. And in these particular scenarios, since they are all information reports, it is giving that charge, that challenge to the reader of, now that you've presented this information, you need to make the best decision for how to move forward, knowing that these are the best practices out here, or this is the best information currently available on this topic. So again, don't reiterate what you've already told us. Tell us what you want to do with everything you've told us. I hope that gives you a better framework for what a conclusion should be. In essence, what does this all mean? This means if we follow this process here, we have framed out and built our foundation, knowing what we're based on, what our purpose and our goals are for our paper. We've done our process, we've built our foundation and our framework, then we've filled in the rest of our building and fleshed it out a little bit more, and we've set a conclusion so our reader knows exactly what is expected of them to go to this next step for where we're going to use our information, how we're going to use it. I hope using this as a framework helped you better understand how to put this paper together. Ask questions as always, and I'll see you in class.